My wife pretended she couldn't clean to make me her servant and said that men are like dogs that you have to train. I proved she was faking it the whole time. Me and my wife Tiffany had been married for 4 years and everything was pretty equal. We both worked full-time, split the bills, took turns cooking, and cleaned the house together every Saturday morning. It was a good system that worked for both of us. Then Tiffany's sister Amber got divorced and started telling her all this stuff about how her ex-husband never appreciated her and how women shouldn't have to work and clean. Amber moved in with this rich guy who hired a maid, and she spent all day shopping and getting her nails done. Suddenly, Tiffany started saying she was too tired to clean on Saturdays. She'd sleep in while I did everything, then complain I didn't do it right. First, it was small things like saying she didn't know how to use the vacuum because it was too complicated. This was the same vacuum she'd been using for 4 years. Then she said she couldn't do laundry anymore because she didn't understand the settings on the washer. She literally bought that washer and set it up herself. When I tried to show her, she'd act confused and say I was going too fast, then mess it up on purpose so clothes would get ruined. After she turned all my white work shirts pink, I just started doing all the laundry myself. The kitchen got worse. She'd cook elaborate meals using every pot and pan we owned, then leave everything dirty saying she didn't know how to load the dishwasher properly. When I asked her to just rinse the dishes, she said the garbage disposal scared her and she might hurt herself. This woman who used to fix her own car was now afraid of a sink. She started leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor because she didn't know where they went. She'd been hanging them on the same hook for 4 years. She left food out overnight because she forgot which containers went in the fridge. She spilled things constantly and just left them there saying she didn't know which cleaner to use. One day I came home to find she'd eaten chips in bed and gotten crumbs everywhere. When I asked her to vacuum them up, she said she tried, but the vacuum was broken. It wasn't plugged in. She said outlets confused her now. I was doing all the housework while working 50 hours a week. Tiffany worked part-time from home and spent most of her day watching TV and texting Amber. When I brought up the division of labor, she cried and said I was being mean about her learning disability. She'd never had a learning disability. She graduated with honors from college. My mom came to visit and was shocked at how messy our house was. When she offered to help clean, Tiffany suddenly knew exactly where everything went and how to use every appliance. She even showed my mom her special method for getting stains out of carpet. My mom mentioned later how impressive Tiffany's cleaning skills were. That's when I knew for sure she was faking. I installed a camera in the living room, told Tiffany it was for security because of break-ins in the neighborhood. She believed it immediately. The next day I went to work like normal, but came back quietly through the back door around lunch. I watched the camera feed from my phone in the garage. Tiffany was deep cleaning the living room while on the phone with Amber. She was literally saying she had my training almost complete, and soon I'd be doing everything while she relaxed. She said men were like dogs. You just had to train them slowly and they'd never notice. She was using the vacuum, dusting with the special attachments, even steam cleaning the curtains. Then she heard my car door close. I watched her dump a full ashtray on the carpet, scatter some magazines around, and lay on the couch. When I walked in, she was pretending to nap. I acted normally and said I forgot some paperwork. Left again and watched her immediately get up and vacuum the ashtray mess. That weekend, I told Tiffany my brother Craig and his wife were coming for dinner. She panicked because the house was a disaster and said we should just go to a restaurant. I said no, I wanted to host, and started cleaning frantically. I acted like I was struggling and asked Tiffany to please try to help just this once. She did her confused act, saying she wanted to help but didn't know how. I said fine, just sit there, I'd handle it myself. About an hour before they arrived, I pretended to hurt my back moving the couch to vacuum under it. I laid on the floor moaning in pain. Tiffany tried to get me up, but I said I couldn't move. I told her she had to clean or call Craig to cancel. She said she'd call Craig. I grabbed my phone and called him myself, putting him on speaker. Told him about my back and how Tiffany didn't know how to clean, so we'd have to cancel. Craig said he was already on his way with his in-laws who were visiting from Japan, and they'd been looking forward to this all week. Tiffany grabbed the phone and said everything would be fine. The second she hung up, she turned into a cleaning machine. She grabbed the vacuum and started working through the living room like she'd done it 1,000 times before. I stayed in the garage watching the phone screen, hitting record on my camera app. Tiffany moved the coffee table to one side and vacuumed under it, then pulled out the attachment she claimed confused her and cleaned along the baseboards. She dragged the couch away from the wall and got all the dust that had built up behind it. Then she went to the shelves and started organizing the books by size, wiping down each shelf with a cloth. She pulled out the steam cleaner from the hall closet and filled it with water, then ran it over the curtains she said she didn't know how to clean. The whole time she was moving fast, checking her watch every few minutes. She vacuumed the rug 3 times to make sure it looked perfect, then fluffed the couch pillows and straightened the magazines on the coffee table. She even dusted the ceiling fan blades with the extendable duster she told me she was too short to use safely. I recorded everything, making sure to get clear shots of her face and all the techniques she'd been pretending not to understand for months. Craig texted that they were 5 minutes away. I watched Tiffany do a final check of the living room, then rushed to the bathroom to fix her hair and wipe the sweat off her face. She changed her shirt quickly and threw the dirty one in the hamper. When the doorbell rang, she took a deep breath and opened it with a big smile. I came in through the back door and walked to the front like I'd just gotten up from resting my back. Craig hugged me carefully and asked how I was feeling. I said it was better, but still sore. His wife brought their kids in, and they immediately started looking around at how clean everything was. Tiffany was breathing hard, and her face was still a bit red, but she covered it by saying she'd been rushing around getting drinks ready for everyone. Craig's in-laws came in last, and his mother-in-law started speaking in Japanese while looking around the house. We all sat down for dinner, and Tiffany brought out the food she'd prepared earlier. Everything looked nice, and the house was spotless. Q's mother kept nodding and saying things in Japanese, and Q translated that she was impressed with how organized and clean our home was. She said it showed we took pride in our space and respected our family. Tiffany thanked her and accepted the compliment graciously, talking about how important it was to keep a clean home. I just ate my food and stayed quiet, watching Tiffany talk about cleaning like she was an expert at it. Craig gave me a look like he knew something was weird, but he didn't say anything. The whole dinner felt strange because I knew what Tiffany had just done, and she was sitting there acting like the house always looked this good. Q's mother asked through Q if Tiffany had any special cleaning tips, and Tiffany actually gave her advice about organizing shelves and keeping carpets clean. I almost laughed, but kept it together. After dinner, everyone left and Tiffany started cleaning up the dishes. I told her to leave them and come sit down because we needed to talk. She looked nervous, but followed me to the living room. I pulled up the security camera app on my phone and connected it to the TV. Her face went completely white when she saw what I was doing. I played the footage from earlier that day when I came home at lunch. The video showed her on the phone with Amber, talking about how her training of me was almost complete. The audio was clear, and you could hear her laughing about how men were like dogs that just needed to be trained slowly. Then it showed her using the vacuum with all the attachments, steam cleaning the curtains, and doing everything she'd been claiming she didn't know how to do. Tiffany tried to grab the remote, but I held it away from her. The video kept playing and showed her hearing my car, then dumping the ashtray on the carpet and messing up the magazines before laying on the couch to pretend she was sleeping. Tiffany started saying the camera angle was weird and made it look worse than it was. She said I was taking everything out of context and that she was just venting to her sister. I switched to the second video from earlier in the day. This one showed her cleaning up the ashtray mess right after I left, vacuuming it all up perfectly and putting everything back in order. She watched herself on the screen doing all the things she claimed she couldn't do. Her hands were shaking and she kept trying to explain it away. She said maybe she was having a good day and things just clicked for her. I asked her how dumping an ashtray on purpose was having a good day. She didn't have an answer for that. She started crying and said she was sorry. She admitted she'd been faking not knowing how to clean for months. She said Amber convinced her she was doing too much work and that she deserved to have an easier life. Amber kept telling her that men needed to be trained to do housework or they'd never help around the house. She said it seemed to be working for Amber's new boyfriend who did everything while Amber relaxed. Tiffany said she didn't think it would hurt anyone if I just did a bit more of the cleaning. She kept crying and saying she knew it was wrong, but Amber made it sound so reasonable. I asked her how lying to my face every single day for months was reasonable. She said she didn't think of it as lying, just as not correcting my assumptions. I told her that was the same thing as lying. I asked if she understood how insulting this was. I told her I'd been watching someone I loved deliberately mess with our partnership and turn me into her servant. She said she didn't think of it as manipulation. She said Amber called it getting a better deal in the relationship, like negotiating. I asked her when we stopped being partners and started negotiating against each other. She didn't have an answer. She just kept crying and saying she was sorry. I told her sorry didn't fix the fact that she'd been playing me for months while laughing about it with her sister. She said she wasn't laughing at me, just talking about how well the plan was working. I told her that was the same thing. We argued for hours. Tiffany kept saying she just wanted an easier life like her sister had. She said Amber's boyfriend did all the housework, and Amber got to relax, and it seemed fair because women did more emotional labor in relationships anyway. I told her that maybe Amber's relationship worked that way, but ours was supposed to be equal. I pointed out that she'd turned me into her servant through lies instead of just talking to me about wanting to change how we split chores. She said she didn't think I'd agree to do more if she just asked. I told her she never gave me the chance to say yes or no because she just started lying instead. She said she was scared I'd say no, and then she'd be stuck doing everything forever. I reminded her that we'd been splitting everything equally for 4 years before Amber got in her head. I told her I needed space and was going to sleep in the guest room. She got upset and asked me not to do that. She said we should talk it through and fix it tonight. I said there was nothing to fix tonight because I was too angry to think straight. She followed me to the guest room and stood in the doorway crying. She asked if I was going to leave her. I said I didn't know what I was going to do, but right now I needed to be alone. She finally left and I locked the door. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every time she'd acted confused about the vacuum or scared of the garbage disposal. Every time she'd left towels on the floor or claimed she didn't know which cleaner to use. All those moments where I felt bad for her and tried to be patient while she pretended to be helpless. I barely slept, just kept thinking about how many times she'd lied straight to my face. The next morning, I got up early and got ready for work without talking to Tiffany. She tried to stop me in the hallway and said we needed to talk about this. I told her I had nothing to say right now. She started crying again and asking what she could do to fix it. I said I didn't know if she could fix it and I left for work. I got to the office an hour early just to avoid being home. My coworker noticed I looked terrible and asked if everything was okay. I told him my wife had been faking incompetence to manipulate me into doing all the housework, and he just stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I told him everything. My coworker Kai sat across from me at the diner booth while I explained the whole thing. How Tiffany pretended she couldn't work the vacuum. How she claimed the garbage disposal scared her. How I caught her on camera talking to Amber about training me like a dog. Kai stopped eating halfway through and just stared at me. He said he couldn't believe someone would fake being helpless for months just to get out of chores. I told him it wasn't just about the chores anymore. It was the lying, the manipulation, the fact that she laughed about it with her sister while I did everything. Kai shook his head and said his ex-wife pulled similar stuff. She'd act like she didn't know how to do basic things until he just started doing them himself. He said once that kind of trust breaks, it's really hard to fix. You start questioning everything they say. Every time they claim they can't do something, you wonder if they're lying again. I asked him if that's why they got divorced. He said it was part of it. The bigger issue was that she never took responsibility. She just kept making excuses and blaming him for being too demanding. I finished my lunch but couldn't really taste it. Kai paid the check and told me to be careful. He said Tiffany doing one nice thing doesn't mean she's actually changed. When I got home that evening, I smelled food cooking. Tiffany was in the kitchen making dinner. The counters were clean. The dishes from breakfast were washed and put away. She'd even wiped down the stove. She smiled when she saw me and said dinner would be ready in 10 minutes. I didn't smile back. I asked her what she was doing. She said she wanted to show me she was serious about changing, that she could do her share without pretending to be confused. I sat down at the table and watched her finish cooking. She plated the food and brought it over. It looked good. She'd made my favorite pasta dish. I took a bite and it tasted fine. She asked if I liked it. I said it was good, but one day of effort doesn't erase months of lies. Her face fell. She said she knew that, but she had to start somewhere. I told her starting would have been not lying in the first place. She got quiet and picked at her food without eating much. After dinner, Tiffany cleared the plates and loaded the dishwasher. She didn't ask me to help. She just did it. When she finished, she came back to the table and sat down. She said she wanted to call Amber together so I could hear her side of things. I asked why I'd want to hear Amber's side. Tiffany said maybe if I understood where the advice came from, I'd see it wasn't as bad as I thought. I told her that sounded like she was still making excuses. She insisted she wasn't. She just thought it might help. I said fine. We could call Amber. Tiffany got her phone and put it on speaker. Amber answered on the second ring. Tiffany explained that I found out about the manipulation plan. Amber immediately got defensive. She said I was overreacting, that all women have to train their husbands a little bit, or men just don't do anything around the house. I could feel my jaw tighten. Tiffany looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I leaned toward the phone and said what Amber told Tiffany to do wasn't training. It was lying and manipulation. Amber's voice got sharp. She said men don't appreciate women's work anyway, so there's nothing wrong with using strategy to level things out. I asked her if she thought lying to your spouse was a strategy. She said it was about survival, that her ex-husband never lifted a finger, and she wasn't going to let that happen to Tiffany. I told her Tiffany and I had been splitting everything equally for 4 years before she started giving advice. Amber said that wouldn't have lasted, that men always stop helping once they get comfortable. I said she was projecting her bad marriage onto ours. She got mad and said I didn't know what I was talking about. Tiffany finally spoke up and asked Amber to calm down. Amber said she was calm, but I was being unfair. I reached over and ended the call. Tiffany sat there staring at the phone. I said her sister's influence had been really bad for our marriage. Tiffany nodded slowly. She said she got caught up in Amber's complaints about her ex, that Amber made it sound like all men were the same, that if Tiffany didn't start training me now, I'd turn into someone who never helped. I asked if she really believed that about me. She said no, not deep down. But Amber was so sure about everything. She made it sound smart, like Tiffany was being naive by trusting me to keep doing my share. I told her that was insulting to both of us. She started crying again and said she knew that now. That she'd started seeing problems in our relationship that weren't really there because Amber kept telling her they would show up eventually. Over the next few days, Tiffany did all the housework without me asking. She vacuumed. She did laundry. She cleaned the bathroom. She cooked and cleaned up after. She kept apologizing every time I came home. I appreciated that she was trying, but it didn't fix anything. I told her the issue wasn't about who does the chores. It was about the fact that she lied to my face for months while laughing about it with her sister. She said she understood, but didn't know what else to do besides show me through actions. I said actions were fine, but they didn't rebuild trust overnight. She looked sad, but nodded. I called Craig to tell him what happened. He got mad on my behalf. He said Q noticed something was weird during dinner, that Tiffany acted strange when Q's mom complimented the house. Now it made sense why. She'd just finished panic cleaning everything and was probably stressed about getting caught. Craig said he couldn't believe Tiffany would do something like that she always seemed reasonable. I said people change when they listen to the wrong advice. Craig asked if we were going to be okay. I said I didn't know yet. Tiffany's behavior started feeling fake. She was cleaning too much, doing things that didn't even need to be done. She'd reorganize cabinets that were already organized. She'd rewash dishes that were already clean. She agreed with everything I said even when I expected her to have a different opinion. It felt like another act. Like she was trying too hard to prove something, and it made me trust her less instead of more. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was she genuinely sorry, or just performing sorry because she got caught? I told her one night that her trying too hard was making things worse, that I couldn't tell what was real about her anymore. She broke down completely. She said she didn't know how to fix what she broke. That everything she did felt wrong, that she was scared I was going to leave her over this. I said I didn't know if I was going to leave, that I was still trying to figure out if we could get past this. She asked what she should do. I said I didn't have an answer, that maybe she should just be herself instead of performing whatever she thought I wanted to see. We sat down later that week and had a calmer talk. Tiffany explained that Amber made the manipulation sound harmless, like a life hack for marriage. Something smart women did to make their lives easier. She said she realizes now how disrespectful it was, that it turned our equal partnership into something ugly, where one person was trying to control the other. I said that's exactly what happened, that she stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as someone to manage. She said she was sorry and meant it. I said sorry was a start, but we had a long way to go before things felt normal again. I told Tiffany later that week that I was struggling to forgive her. Every time I remembered her acting confused about the vacuum or scared of the garbage disposal, I knew she was lying straight to my face. The betrayal went deeper than just avoiding housework. It showed me she was willing to deceive me for months, just to make her own life easier. She could look me in the eye and pretend to be helpless while secretly laughing about it with Amber. That hurt worse than anything else. Tiffany asked what she could do to rebuild the trust between us. I sat there trying to think of an answer, but nothing came to mind. We kept having the same fight over and over. She'd apologize and promise to change, then I'd bring up another example of her lying and we'd start arguing all over again. I finally told her we needed professional help because we were going in circles. She agreed immediately and looked relieved that I was willing to try counseling instead of just giving up on the marriage. We found a counselor who had an opening the following week and scheduled an appointment. Tiffany seemed happy to have a concrete plan forward. I was just exhausted from carrying around all this anger and hurt. The emotional weight of the whole situation was crushing me. I couldn't sleep well. I couldn't focus at work. Every time I looked at her, I remembered the camera footage of her deep cleaning while calling me a dog she was training. At work on Tuesday, Kai stopped by my desk and asked how things were going at home. I told him we'd scheduled marriage counseling for next week. He nodded and said his divorce started with a similar trust issue. His ex-wife had been hiding money in a secret account for years while claiming they couldn't afford things he wanted. Once he found out, he couldn't trust anything she said anymore. Kai warned me that resentment builds fast if you don't address it properly. He said counseling only works if both people are genuinely committed to change, not just going through the motions to make the other person happy. I told him Tiffany seemed serious about fixing things, but I wasn't sure if she really understood how deep the betrayal went. Kai said that was the hard part. Sometimes people don't realize how badly they've damaged things until it's too late to fix. The night before our counseling appointment, Tiffany came into the living room with her phone. She sat down next to me and said she wanted to show me something. She pulled up text messages between her and Amber from months ago. I read through them, feeling my anger rise with each message. Amber was actively coaching Tiffany on how to fake incompetence. She told Tiffany to act confused about simple tasks and to mess things up on purpose so I'd stop asking her to help. When Tiffany texted that she felt guilty lying to me, Amber told her not to be stupid. She said all women have to train their husbands and that I'd never notice as long as Tiffany did it gradually. There were dozens of messages like this going back almost 4 months. Amber was constantly encouraging Tiffany to keep up the act, even when Tiffany expressed doubt. Reading those messages made me angry at Amber, but also frustrated with Tiffany. I pointed out that she was a grown woman who made her own choices. Blaming her sister entirely didn't take responsibility for her own actions. Tiffany nodded and said she knew that. She said she was showing me the messages to prove she wasn't trying to hide anything anymore, not to shift all the blame to Amber. I appreciated that, but it didn't change the fact that she'd gone along with the manipulation for months. She chose to listen to Amber's terrible advice instead of talking to me honestly about feeling overwhelmed or wanting to change our division of labor. That choice was on her. Our first counseling session was tense. The counselor was a middle-aged woman with gray hair and a calm voice. She asked us each to explain what happened from our perspective. I went first and laid out the whole story. The fake incompetence, the camera footage, the dinner party situation. Tiffany went next and described it as just wanting an easier life like her sister had. She said she didn't think it was that serious, and that lots of women do similar things to get their husbands to help more around the house. Hearing her say that made me realize she still didn't fully grasp how serious the betrayal was. She was minimizing it like it was just a little white lie instead of months of deliberate deception. The counselor let us both finish talking before she said anything. Then she looked at Tiffany and said her actions showed contempt for me and our relationship. She explained that contempt is one of the most damaging patterns in a marriage because it means you view your partner as beneath you, or less than you. Tiffany looked shocked when the counselor used the word contempt. She said she didn't feel contempt for me. The counselor asked her to think about what it means to manipulate someone by pretending to be incompetent, to treat them like they're too stupid to notice what you're doing, to laugh about training them like an animal with your sister. Tiffany's face went pale and she looked down at her hands. She said quietly that she never thought of it that way. The counselor said that was part of the problem. She'd been so focused on getting what she wanted that she didn't consider how disrespectful her behavior was. The counselor gave us homework before we left. We each had to write down what we needed from the other person to move forward. I spent hours on my list that night. I kept starting over because I needed to figure out if I could actually forgive this or if the damage was too deep. Could I ever trust Tiffany again when she'd proven she was willing to deceive me for her own convenience? Could I look at her doing housework without wondering if she was faking incompetence about something else? Could I believe anything she said when she'd lied so easily for so long? I finally wrote down that I needed consistent honesty, not just words, but actions that proved she was being truthful. I needed time to rebuild trust through seeing her follow through on promises. I needed her to cut back contact with Amber since her influence had been so destructive to our marriage. Tiffany showed me her list the next morning. She'd written that she needed me to believe she'd changed and to stop bringing up the past. She needed me to give her credit for all the cleaning and cooking she was doing now, instead of focusing on what she did wrong before. She needed me to forgive her and move forward instead of holding on to anger. I read her list and felt frustrated all over again. My list was about what I needed to feel safe trusting her again. Her list was about what she needed to feel comfortable and avoid consequences. We were on completely different pages about what moving forward actually meant. At our next counseling session, the counselor asked us both to share what we'd written. Tiffany read hers first, and I could see the counselor's expression change as she listened. When it was my turn, I read through my list slowly, making sure Tiffany heard every point about needing consistent honesty and time to rebuild trust. The counselor nodded and said she could see we were approaching forgiveness from completely different angles. She explained that Tiffany wanted to move past the incident quickly because staying in the discomfort of guilt felt unbearable. I wanted to take time because rushing forgiveness would feel like minimizing what happened. The counselor said this mismatch in healing timelines was creating extra tension on top of the original problem. Tiffany looked frustrated when the counselor said that, like she'd hoped for a quicker path forward. The counselor asked Tiffany if she could accept that earning back trust would be a slow process measured in months, not weeks. Tiffany said yes, but I could tell she didn't like it. The counselor then asked what concrete changes we could both commit to. Tiffany said she would limit contact with Amber since her influence had been so harmful to our marriage. She also promised to be more direct about her feelings, instead of resorting to manipulation when she wanted something. I told the counselor I would try to move forward instead of staying stuck in anger, though I made it clear that rebuilding trust would take months at minimum. The counselor wrote down both commitments and said we'd check in on them regularly. She also said that progress wouldn't be linear, and we'd probably have setbacks along the way. Tiffany reached for my hand as we left the office, and I let her take it, which felt like a small step. Over the next few weeks, things got better in small ways. Tiffany started being more communicative about household tasks instead of just doing them silently. She'd ask directly if she needed help with something heavy or if I wanted to cook together that night. It felt like genuine progress because she was treating me like a partner again instead of someone to manipulate. One morning she made coffee and brought me a cup without me asking, which sounds like nothing, but it reminded me of how things used to be. We still had awkward moments where I'd catch myself watching her to see if she was being honest about something. She noticed me doing it a few times, and it clearly hurt her feelings, but she didn't get defensive about it. Amber called Tiffany one afternoon while I was working from home in the next room. I could hear Tiffany's side of the conversation through the wall. Amber was apparently upset that she was blamed for their marital problems. Tiffany's voice stayed calm and firm as she told Amber that her advice had been wrong and harmful. She said she needed space from her sister while she worked on fixing her marriage. Amber must have argued back because Tiffany repeated herself more forcefully, then ended the call. I heard her sigh heavily after she hung up. I walked into the living room and found Tiffany sitting on the couch looking drained. She told me Amber was mad and didn't understand why Tiffany was cutting her off. I sat down next to her and said she'd handled it well. Tiffany looked surprised that I was being supportive instead of critical. I told her I was proud of her for setting that boundary with her sister. It was the first time I'd felt genuinely hopeful that we might actually get through this whole mess. Tiffany's eyes got watery, and she thanked me for saying that. We sat together for a while without talking, which felt comfortable instead of tense. A few days later, we had a setback that caught me off guard. Tiffany was loading the dishwasher and put a pan in the wrong spot. It was a tiny thing that didn't matter at all, but I felt anger spike up in my chest. I snapped at her about doing it wrong, and she looked shocked. I walked away before I said something worse and stood in the garage trying to calm down. After a few minutes, I realized I was still carrying so much resentment that even small things were triggering me. The pan placement didn't actually matter. I was just looking for reasons to be mad because forgiveness felt impossible. I went back inside and apologized to Tiffany for overreacting. She said she understood, but I could see the hurt in her face. At our next counseling session, I admitted I was struggling with intrusive thoughts about all the times she'd lied. The counselor said this was completely normal and that trust rebuilding is never a straight line upward. She told me I needed to be patient with myself while also not punishing Tiffany forever for past actions. She said holding on to anger indefinitely would poison the relationship just as much as the original betrayal had. Tiffany asked what she could do to help, and the counselor suggested finding ways to demonstrate consistent follow-through over time. She said actions would rebuild trust more effectively than words ever could. The next week, Tiffany started keeping a shared calendar on our phones where she logged household tasks she completed. She didn't ask me to check it or make a big deal about it, just quietly started tracking everything. It felt a bit formal and weird at first, like we were roommates instead of married people. But I appreciated the transparency because I could see her following through on things without having to verify or question her. She cleaned the bathroom every Tuesday and logged it. She did laundry every Thursday and logged it. After a few weeks of watching her stick to the schedule, I felt some of my suspicions start to ease. We had our first genuinely good day in months on a random Wednesday. We cooked dinner together, working side by side in the kitchen without any tension. Tiffany made a joke about something stupid she saw on social media, and I actually laughed. We ate on the couch watching some reality show and making fun of the contestants. It reminded me of how things used to be before Amber's influence poisoned everything. Tiffany noticed me smiling and asked what I was thinking. I told her I was glad we were having a normal evening together. She squeezed my hand and said she was too. Craig called a few days later and invited us over for dinner. I hesitated because the last time we'd seen them had been so awkward. But Craig said Q wanted to have us over, and it would be casual, just the four of us. I agreed and told Tiffany about it. She looked nervous but said she wanted to go. When we arrived at their house, Q greeted us warmly and Craig gave me a hug. The evening was less awkward than I'd expected. Tiffany apologized to both of them for the weirdness during their last visit to our place. Q was gracious about it and said she was glad we were working things out. Craig stayed a bit more protective of me throughout the night, watching Tiffany carefully, but he was polite. We left feeling like maybe we could rebuild our relationships with other people too, not just each other. A few days later at work, I grabbed lunch with Kai in the break room. He looked at me while we were eating and said I seemed different somehow, like I wasn't carrying as much weight around. I told him things with Tiffany were getting better slowly, that we were putting in the work with counseling and she was really trying. Kai nodded and said he was glad we were actually dealing with it, instead of just letting the anger build up until it destroyed everything. He got quiet for a minute, and then mentioned that's what happened with his ex-wife, that they just let problems pile up without addressing them until there was too much damage to fix. I asked him if he regretted not trying harder, and he said sometimes, but mostly he regretted not being honest about the issues earlier when they might have been fixable. We finished eating and went back to our desks, but his words stuck with me the rest of the day. That evening when I got home, Tiffany was cooking dinner and the kitchen was already clean from her prep work. She turned down the stove and said she'd been thinking about something. She suggested we should redo our whole division of household labor more formally, so nothing felt unclear or up for debate. I sat down at the kitchen table while she pulled out a notebook, and we started listing every task that needed doing regularly. We wrote down who would handle what and on which days, making sure the workload felt balanced between us. Tiffany said she wanted it in writing so there was no confusion and no room for her to slip back into old patterns. We spent over an hour creating a schedule that felt fair to both of us, and she immediately put it on the fridge where we'd both see it every day. Over the next few weeks, she stuck to that schedule without complaining once. She did the laundry every Thursday like clockwork, cleaned the bathroom every Tuesday, took out the trash on Sundays. I watched her follow through consistently, and it started rebuilding something that had been broken between us. One Saturday morning, I was getting ready to go grocery shopping, and Tiffany said she'd handle picking up the dry cleaning while I was out. I grabbed my keys and left without thinking twice about whether she'd actually do it. It wasn't until I was halfway to the store that I realized I hadn't felt the need to verify or double-check that she would follow through. I just trusted her word automatically like I used to before everything fell apart. When I got home, the dry cleaning was hanging in the closet exactly where it belonged. These small moments kept happening where I caught myself trusting her again without consciously deciding to. She said she'd call the plumber about the leaky faucet, and I didn't worry about whether it would get done. She mentioned she'd paid the electric bill, and I didn't feel compelled to log into the account and verify. Each time it happened, I felt a little more like we were actually making real progress instead of just going through the motions. At our next counseling session, the therapist reviewed her notes from our previous meetings and said we'd made significant strides in rebuilding trust and communication. She asked if we wanted to continue with weekly sessions or if we felt ready to take a break. Tiffany and I looked at each other and I could tell we were thinking the same thing. I said we'd like to keep coming, but maybe switch to monthly instead of weekly, that the structure of having these sessions had really helped us communicate better, and we didn't want to lose that. Tiffany agreed and said having the counselor as a neutral third party made it easier to talk through difficult things without falling into our old argument patterns. The therapist smiled and said monthly maintenance sessions were a great idea, that many couples found them helpful for staying on track after doing the intensive work. We scheduled our next appointment for 4 weeks out and left feeling like we'd reached a real milestone. The following Tuesday, Tiffany's phone rang while we were watching TV, and I saw Amber's name on the screen. Tiffany looked at me nervously before answering, and I nodded that it was okay. She went into the bedroom to take the call, and I could hear her voice through the door, but not the actual words. After about 20 minutes, she came back out looking frustrated. She sat down next to me and explained that Amber wanted to reconcile and rebuild their relationship. I asked how Tiffany felt about that, and she said she told Amber she was willing to work on things, but only if Amber acknowledged that her advice had been harmful and wrong. Amber apparently got defensive and said she was just trying to help Tiffany have an easier life like she did. Tiffany told her that advice nearly destroyed her marriage, and she needed Amber to take responsibility for that before they could move forward. Amber said she didn't think she should have to apologize for Tiffany's choices, and they ended the call without resolving anything. Tiffany was quiet the rest of the evening, and I could tell she was upset about the situation with her sister. Before bed, she came and found me in the bathroom brushing my teeth. She said she was really sad about things with Amber, but that she was choosing our marriage over her sister's approval. She said Amber had been a huge part of her life for so long, but that toxic influence wasn't worth risking what we were rebuilding. I rinsed my mouth and turned to look at her, seeing how much that decision was costing her emotionally. I told her I was proud of her for setting that boundary, and that it showed she was taking full responsibility for her choices, instead of blaming everything on Amber's influence. She hugged me tight and I could feel her shaking a little bit. This felt like a major turning point, like she was finally choosing us over the easy path her sister represented. A few weeks later was our 5th wedding anniversary. We'd talked about going out to dinner somewhere nice, but decided we'd rather stay home and keep it quiet. Tiffany made my favorite meal, and we ate at the dining room table with candles lit. It felt significant that we'd made it through this crisis when a few months ago, I wasn't sure we would. After dinner, she handed me a card, and I could tell she'd spent a long time picking it out. Inside, she'd written a long message apologizing genuinely for what she'd put me through and promising to never take our partnership for granted again. She wrote that she understood how close she'd come to losing me, and that she'd spend however long it took proving she could be trusted. I read it twice and felt something shift inside me, like the anger I'd been holding on to was finally starting to let go. I looked up at Tiffany sitting across from me and told her I forgave her, and this time I actually meant it. The anger had faded into something more like sadness about all the time we'd lost to this situation, but I genuinely believed we were stronger for having worked through it instead of giving up. She started crying and reached across the table to hold my hand. We sat there for a while, not saying anything, just being together in a way that felt peaceful instead of tense. Later, we cleaned up the dishes together, and it felt normal again, like we'd finally found our way back to being partners instead of adversaries. Over the next few weeks, we started making plans for the future again, in a way we hadn't been able to during the worst of everything. We talked about taking a vacation somewhere warm next winter, maybe Hawaii or Mexico. Tiffany mentioned she'd been thinking about whether we wanted to start a family eventually, and asked how I felt about it. I said I wanted to make sure we were solid first, but that, yeah, I could see us having kids someday. These conversations felt hopeful, instead of weighted down with all the unresolved tension that had been hanging over us for months. We were actually looking forward instead of just trying to survive the present. The next time I saw Kai at work, he pulled me aside during our afternoon break. He said he was impressed we'd worked things out because most couples don't survive the kind of betrayal I'd described. I told him it took a lot of effort from both of us, and that professional help made a huge difference, but that our foundation was strong enough to rebuild on. Kai said his marriage didn't have that foundation to begin with, so when trust broke, there was nothing left to build from. I felt grateful that Tiffany and I had those 4 good years before everything went wrong, that we had something worth fighting for instead of just walking away. About a month after the anniversary, Tiffany started meeting up with her old college roommate Sarah for coffee every Wednesday morning. She'd been close with Sarah before Amber's divorce, but had drifted away when she started spending all her time with her sister. Sarah worked as a teacher and had 2 kids, so their schedules didn't always line up, but they made it work. Tiffany came home from their first meetup looking lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. She told me Sarah had asked where she'd been for the past year, and Tiffany admitted she'd gotten too wrapped up in Amber's problems. Sarah said she understood but missed hanging out, and they made plans to grab lunch the following week too. Over the next few weeks, Tiffany reconnected with a few other friends she'd been neglecting. She went to a birthday party for someone from her book club and came home talking about how much fun she had. She started texting with her friend from work more often, and they went shopping together one Saturday while I watched a game at home. I noticed she seemed happier having her own social life again, instead of just living through Amber's drama. She had her own stories to tell at dinner, instead of just repeating things Amber had said or done. It felt like she was becoming more herself again, rather than a shadow of her sister's influence. One Tuesday evening, I was loading the dishwasher after dinner when Tiffany came into the kitchen and started putting away leftovers. I mentioned that she'd put the pasta container on the wrong shelf, and for a second her face tightened like she was going to get defensive. Then she stopped and asked which shelf I meant. I showed her where we usually kept those containers so they'd stack better, and she moved it without any drama. She said she honestly hadn't noticed the system before and thanked me for pointing it out. It was such a small thing, but it felt huge because a few months ago that would have turned into a fight, or she would have pretended not to understand what I was saying. Instead, we just talked it through like normal people and moved on with our evening. Later that night, I thought about how that interaction proved we'd actually changed our patterns. We could have a minor disagreement about household stuff and handle it like adults instead of turning it into manipulation or games. It made me feel more confident that we were really fixing things and not just putting a band-aid on a bigger problem. At our monthly counseling session the next week, the counselor asked how things were going, and we both said they were good. I told her about the dishwasher conversation and how we'd handled it without any weirdness. Tiffany mentioned reconnecting with her friends and how that had helped her feel more balanced. The counselor smiled and said she was proud of the work we'd put in over the past few months. She said a lot of couples would have given up when trust got broken like ours did, but we chose to fight for the relationship instead of just walking away. She asked if we felt like we were in a good place, and Tiffany said yes immediately. I took a second longer to answer, but then agreed that yeah, we were doing well. The counselor said we could start spacing out our sessions to every 6 weeks if we wanted, or even less frequently if we felt stable enough. We decided to stick with monthly for now because having that regular check-in felt helpful even when things were going smoothly. It gave us a space to talk about small issues before they could turn into bigger problems. A few days later, Tiffany and I were sitting on the couch watching TV when she got quiet during a commercial break. I asked what was wrong, and she said she still felt guilty sometimes about what she'd done to me. She said she knew we'd worked through it and things were better, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd really hurt me and broken my trust. I thought about it for a minute and told her that feeling guilty was probably healthy because it meant she understood the weight of what happened. If she didn't feel bad about it at all, that would be more concerning. But I also told her she didn't need to carry that guilt forever like some kind of punishment. She'd apologized, we'd done the work to rebuild, and at some point she needed to forgive herself too. She nodded and wiped her eyes, then leaned against my shoulder. We sat like that for a while, not saying anything, just being together in a way that felt comfortable and safe. It reminded me of how we used to be before everything went wrong, but also felt different because we'd been through something hard and come out the other side. About 2 weeks later, Tiffany's phone buzzed while we were making breakfast together on Saturday morning. She looked at it and her expression changed to surprise. She showed me the screen, and it was a text from Amber saying she was sorry for the advice she'd given and that her divorce had made her bitter. Amber wrote that she'd been projecting her anger at her ex onto all men and had given Tiffany terrible advice as a result. She said she understood if Tiffany needed space, but wanted to apologize for her part in what happened. Tiffany looked at me and asked if I was okay with her responding and maybe cautiously rebuilding that relationship. I said yes, but with clear boundaries. I told her she could talk to Amber and even see her if she wanted, but that I needed her to shut down any conversation where Amber started talking about manipulating partners or treating relationships like power struggles. Tiffany agreed immediately and said she wouldn't let Amber influence her like that again. She texted back a careful response thanking Amber for the apology and suggesting they grab coffee sometime soon to talk in person. The following weekend, Craig and Q came over for dinner again. This time there was no panic or stress about cleaning beforehand. The house was in decent shape because we'd both been keeping up with things naturally throughout the week. Tiffany cooked lasagna, and I made a salad, and we had everything ready when they arrived at 6. Q's mother wasn't visiting this time, but Q mentioned that she'd been impressed with our home when she was here before. Tiffany handled the compliment without any weirdness, just thanked her and said we tried to keep things nice. We ate dinner and talked about normal stuff like Craig's job and a trip Q was planning to visit family in Japan next spring. Nobody brought up the manipulation situation or the awkward dinner from months ago. Everything just felt normal and happy, like we were two couples hanging out without any underlying tension. After they left, Tiffany and I cleaned up the dishes together, and she mentioned how nice it was to have people over without all the stress and drama from last time. I was driving home from work on a Wednesday afternoon a couple weeks later when I realized I hadn't thought about the manipulation incident in over a week. Maybe even longer than that. It used to be on my mind constantly, coming up whenever Tiffany did anything around the house or when I'd catch myself watching her to see if she was faking something. But lately it just wasn't there anymore, taking up space in my head. The fact that it was no longer constantly on my mind felt like a real sign that I'd genuinely healed from it. I wasn't holding on to anger or resentment anymore. I'd actually moved past it instead of just pretending to for the sake of the relationship. When I got home, I didn't mention this realization to Tiffany right away. I just sat with it for a while, noticing how much lighter I felt without that weight. That Saturday morning, Tiffany and I were having coffee on the back porch when she brought up what we'd learned from this whole experience. She said she'd been thinking about it a lot and realized that shortcuts and manipulation destroy trust even when they seem harmless at first. She said she'd thought she was being smart by following Amber's advice, but all she did was damage the best relationship she had. I told her I'd learned something too, which was that I needed to address problems directly instead of silently resenting them. If I'd spoken up earlier when things started feeling unequal, maybe we could have avoided months of problems. We talked about how we both made mistakes, but also how working through them had taught us to communicate better. It felt good to have that conversation without blame or defensiveness, just two people reflecting on how they'd grown. The next week, Tiffany came home from work excited about an idea she'd had. She wanted to plan a trip for next month, maybe somewhere warm since it was getting cold here. She pulled up her laptop and started showing me beach resorts in Florida and Mexico, talking about which ones looked nice and what we could do there. I felt myself getting excited too, looking at pictures of clear water and palm trees. The excitement felt pure and simple, not complicated by underlying tension or worry about whether we were really okay. We spent the evening researching flights and hotels, making plans like we used to before everything went wrong. Our partnership felt solid again in a way that was different from before, built on harder-won trust that we'd had to fight for, instead of just assuming it would always be there. Things are really good now between us. We both do our share around the house without keeping score or making it into a competition. Tiffany handles laundry, and I do most of the cooking, but we're flexible about switching if someone's tired or busy. We communicate honestly about problems instead of letting them build up or using manipulation to get our way. We're genuinely happy together in a way that feels earned rather than just lucky. The whole mess with Amber's advice almost destroyed us, and there were times I wasn't sure we'd make it through. But we chose to do the hard work of rebuilding instead of giving up, and that made our marriage stronger than it was before. We know now that we can survive something difficult and come out better on the other side. That knowledge makes everything feel more secure, like we've tested the foundation and found it solid enough to build on for years to come.